The earliest railroad projectors were zealous as missionaries and about as practical. None of these men had even seen the Far West. Yet they insisted this railroad would be the main commercial road between Europe and Asia. The whole commerce of the vast world, one exclaimed, will be tumbled into our lap. Few Americans bought into these dreamy projections. Much of the West was presumed useless. A land, said one United States senator, which no American citizen should be compelled to inhabit unless as a punishment for crime. Many in Congress shied at starting such a difficult and costly project as the Civil War raged. But President Abraham Lincoln, who had long championed a Pacific Railroad, was lobbying hard for the project.
Lincoln had a problem. The Federal Union was falling apart. He was fighting a costly and bloody civil war to put the Union together. And here we had 3 Pacific states, California, Oregon, 1859, Nevada, 1863, 3 Pacific states that were a continent away.
It was essential for the conduct of the Civil War to have California money. California had a fairly strong secessionist movement. There was no way of guaranteeing that California would remain in the Union. That railroad was essential to keep the 2 coasts together.
On July 1st, 1862, President Lincoln signed a bill that gave Judah's own Central Pacific the right to build from Sacramento east, and chartered a second company, the Union Pacific, to build from the Missouri River west. The legislation did not specify a meeting point for the 2 roads, but it did grant the railroad builders 6,400 acres of land for every mile of track laid, and as much as $48,000 in government bonds for each mile completed. There were strings, of course, and enough of them to hang both companies. The government would withhold nearly 20% of the bonds until the entire line was in working order, and it would not release a single dime to either company until it had built 40 miles of working railroad. If the road was not completed between the Missouri and Sacramento rivers within a dozen years, all railroad company assets would be forfeited. The 1862 Railroad Act did not specify a starting point in the east. Railroads had already been built out past the Mississippi River, so the jumping-off point for the new road would be somewhere along the Missouri. But again, Congress could not agree. The burden of decision, like so many other burdens, fell on the stooped shoulders of President Abraham Lincoln. In November of 1863, 2 days before he gave the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln puzzled over the maps and financial affidavits provided him by the Union Pacific Company. Lincoln knew the 450 miles across Nebraska's Platte River Valley offered a cheap and easy start. He also knew he had political favors to repay, so he chose, as the eastern terminus, Council Bluffs, Iowa.
He was nominated in 1860 on the 3rd ballot. Seward had been leading on the 1st ballot, and his managers made all kinds of deals. And the bulk of the Iowa delegates to the Republican National Convention switched over to Lincoln, and he really owed them something after the 1860 election. And this was kind of a payoff to Iowa.
This was happy news for Thomas Clark Durant. The vice president of the new Union Pacific Railroad Company was heavily invested in real estate just across the river in Omaha, Nebraska. That real estate would be much more valuable if the railroad west began there. So the real terminus, as far as Durant was concerned, would be Omaha. Thomas C. Durant had begun his professional career as a doctor of ophthalmology, but found the world of business a more invigorating occupation for a man of his thrusting personality. He was a restless, energetic man who loved making money and knew how to do it. In fact, throughout his life, Durant showed a remarkable integrity of purpose. The Civil War, he discovered, was a bang-up way to cash in on contraband cotton.
Durant comes across to me as a scoundrel. He's like someone that would bet on the other team. He would manipulate the market against his own company, just for his own personal fortune.
He was a tremendous stock manipulator. In one episode, he made $5 million in 1 week, pushing the stock of one railroad down and the stock of another railroad up, and then going back into the original stock.
Durant had seen railroads being built across Michigan and into Illinois. He knew that there was a lot of money to be made, but usually it was along the side. His whole life with the Union Pacific, he really, I don't think, cared whether it actually got finished. He just wanted to make as much money along the side as he could, and the people who worked under him knew that.
Durant's earlier railroad projects were small potatoes compared to the Union Pacific. This new road was the biggest single government-funded construction project ever, and the 43-year-old Durant wasn't going to miss out. He managed, illegally, to get control of $2.2 million worth of shares in the Union Pacific, installed his own straw man as president, and took charge of the company. In 1864, in hopes of getting extra government aid, the doctor distributed $435,000 in cash and $250,000 in bonds among legislators, their proxies, friends, and relatives. If you think it's safe, Congressman Lorenzo de Medici Sweat wrote to Durant, please let me into some purchase of stock, will you? I will give my personal attention to your interests here. The Honorable Sweat and his colleagues passed a revised railroad bill in the summer of 1864. The new act doubled the land grants, permitted the UP and the CP to borrow money in advance of the line built, and ceded to the railroad companies all coal, iron, and precious minerals found on the granted lands. With these new enticements in place, Durant set up a separate corporation, a top-secret entity called Crédito Mobilier. Only a few of Durant's special friends were offered stock in the new company.
The Crédito Mobilier was almost a revolutionary business practice at the time. It was the idea of a railroad company being able to borrow money on the land that they didn't even own yet, but would if they actually built the railroad. That was the first principle. The second principle, though, was the real center of energy for it, and that was the notion of limited liability. Up until then, anybody investing in a company, if the company got into trouble, that person would be liable for not only what they had in the company, but their own personal fortunes, their own houses, their own property. But with this new idea, if a company got into trouble, the investor would only lose his investment, and this was a kind of an insulation that had never been practiced in business before.
The Crédito Mobilier was really formed by the directors of the Union Pacific to do the construction. Now, originally, Durant gave the contract to an associate named Herbert Hoxie. What Hoxie did was hold the contract for a short period of time, sell it to Durant for $10,000, so the Crédito Mobilier would build the road and then charge the Union Pacific. In effect, Durant was paying himself for building the railroad. The Hoxie contract called for building the railroad up the Platte Valley at $50,000 per mile. Peter Day was the chief engineer, and he made the statement that anybody who charged $50,000 for a railroad down the Platte Valley was nothing but a thief.
The contract was worth $12.5 million for building the first 247 miles of the Union Pacific Railroad. Peter Day figured it would cost half that. The rest was pure profit. But the doctor knew nobody was really watching. Congressional oversight was virtually non-existent. So Durant's next move was the boldest yet.
They were being paid by the mile, so why not make the line longer? So what he did was he took a perfectly good railroad survey and he lengthened it with this tremendous oxbow-shaped route that went out in a different direction from Omaha and added about $500,000 to Durant's pocket in the bargain.
Peter Day resigned in protest, but it didn't much matter. More than 2 years after Congress had chartered the company, the Union Pacific was little more than a paper railroad. When the Civil War came to an end in March of 1865, the UP had not spiked a single length of track. When the railroad's great champion, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated a month later, the company still had not laid any iron. And on Independence Day, 1865, Still nothing. Many in Congress were wondering if they should simply cut losses and withdraw support from the Union Pacific Railroad. Thomas C. Durant had good instincts for self-preservation, and he understood it was now in his interest to start building a railroad. Suddenly he cared about nothing else.
He just sent a veritable blizzard of telegrams out to the poor people who were working for him out on the line, saying, hurry up, we are far behind our time. What are you doing wrong? I can replace you very easily. I want more work out of you. I will not accept no for an answer, and I will not accept failure.
Day after day, Durant wired his crew bosses in Nebraska. Do you or do you not want more men to lay 60 miles this fall? If so, what kind? If men are not fed well and made comfortable, they will not stay. See to this. What is the matter that you can't lay track faster? In the spring of 1868, on a windy plain 8,200 feet up in the Rocky Mountains, 30 miles west of Cheyenne, 530 west of Omaha, the Union Pacific Railroad laid rails at the highest point on the transcontinental line, and Thomas Durant shot off a telegram to Central Pacific President Leland Stanford, announcing the achievement. Stanford wired back his congratulations with a sly rejoinder: "May your descent be rapid." The effect of the original railroad legislation was just now becoming clear. It had made the two companies bitter rivals. This was a zero-sum game. Every dollar gained by one company was a dollar lost to the other. And only one company would get the valuable coal fields in western Wyoming and eastern Utah. "I'll be damned," Durant had said, "if I would not prevent the CP from coming more than 200 miles east of California." In the nation's capital especially, it was beginning to look like the fight would be costly.
We have Congressman Oaks Ames down in Washington. The Credit Mobilier had just declared a dividend. It was quite a high dividend. And the congressman got wind of it. And this almost anonymous man from Massachusetts walks out to his desk in the Hall of Congress, and all of a sudden he is just absolutely surrounded by congressmen and senators looking to buy into this Credit Mobilier, to get whatever they could for free if possible, or perhaps to be loaned the purchase price. And he couldn't keep up with it. These were men who would be voting on railroad legislation, and yet they were becoming stockholders in the very company that was getting the railroad built.
Collis P. Huntington was passing out cash and stocks, too, in hopes of winning the rights to the Wasatch coal fields east of Salt Lake. "If $100,000 will get the line located," he wrote to Hopkins, "I shall get it done." When the railroad company's financial shortcuts became an issue in the 1872 elections, Congress embarked on dramatic and well-publicized hearings. Collis Huntington and his partners were little help in the investigation. They were sorry, they said, but they'd thrown away all their records. Thomas C. Durant, as always, slipped the noose. Even as he was testifying, he was buying up more than 700,000 acres of land in upstate New York, developing a new railroad. Congressman Oaks Ames, who had dealt Credit Mobilier stock to his fellow legislators, became the lone scapegoat.
Oaks Ames was tossed out of the Congressional Club, and virtually everyone else got off scot-free. Ames retired in disgrace and went back to Massachusetts, and he was dead within a matter of weeks, I think just of accumulated griefs over the whole scandal.